Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Doug Show. My name's Doug Cunnington, and in this episode, we're going to talk about The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, one of those books that, really kind of changed the world, at least my world, and I read it like 7 years after it came out. In this episode, I have a couple buddies that are helping me out. They've both been on the channel before. One is Cody Berman, and I've interviewed him at least a couple times. He has a financial independence podcast called The Fi Show, so you should check that out. We'll link up to that show. We'll link up to his previous appearances as well. He's a entrepreneur, very successful, very driven, and he has a lot of different side hustles that he works on. The other person is Stephen Keys. He blogs over at Trip of a Lifestyle. And I met him a couple years ago at one of the events here in Longmont, the town that I live in. I guess it's not technically my hometown, but I live here, consider it home. And I met Stephen and Lauren. Lauren is his wife, and they blog. They retired at, I think, around 29 or 30. They travel quite a bit. In fact, they've been to all the national parks here in the U.S. Stephen and Lauren checked out the 4-Hour Work Week very recently, and they had some cool insights based on the fact that they hadn't read it before, but ended up in a place where they have retired and they don't have to have a full-time job. They do some dabbling on the side, some hobby things. But anyway, we talk about the 4-Hour Work Week generally. We talk about the things that we have applied specifically, things that maybe are not as relevant anymore in 2023 since the book was written in 2007. So anyway, if you have any comments or observations from your experience with the 4-Hour Work Week, please leave a comment or shoot me an email over at feedback@Doug.Show. One last thing before we get to the meat of the episode here. Currently, if you're listening to this the week that it's released and published, I am giving out a free 3-part email series. Now, technically, when this comes out, the first part will have been sent out already, but it's a free email series for people that want to start or grow a niche site. It's based on multiple streams of income and that sort of thing. So it gets you motivated. It helps you understand what your goals are. And again, it's free via email. I'll put a link in the description here so that you can get to it if you want to, and you'll be able to, get the second part or third part or whenever you listen to it. And if you happen to listen to it not in the January 16th through the 20th, 2023. If you're listening to it some other time in the future, you can shoot me an email, feedback@Doug.Show, and I can show you where to sign up for the email series. All right. Thanks a lot to Stephen and Cody, and let's get to the episode right now. Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Doug Show. My name's Doug Cunnington, and today we're going back and talking about the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And I have a couple friends who have also read the book and it impacted them. So I have Stephen Keys and Cody Berman, who have both been on the podcast before. So we'll link up to their other shows. But today the focus is the 4-Hour Work Week. So we're going to sort of riff on it, talk about things that impacted us, talk about things that held up, maybe things that didn't hold up, and just kind of where we're at now and if the 4-Hour Work Week is still useful. So before we get started and talk about the 4-Hour Work Week, we'll get an intro from the guys here. So we'll start with Stephen. Can you let us know who you are and what you're doing these days?
Hey, so I read a blog called tripofalifestyle.com, and it's about early retirement and traveling really cheaply around. And funny enough, I actually read the 4-Hour Work Week with my wife while we were on like a 2-month road trip through Canada. And, I feel like most people who find this book are like in like this grindy job or whatever. And we're kind of like in our early retirement travel stage reading this book about it. But it was still like really interesting to learn from.
All right. And when did you read it, Stephen?
Just this year, actually.
Okay. So a late comer to the party.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. What about you, Cody?
So I'm Cody Berman. I am a passive income enthusiast and talk all things passive income. Spend most of my time running a company called Gold City Ventures, where we teach other people how to create passive income through digital products. I actually discovered the 4-hour work week when I was 19 years old. I was a sophomore in college. So this was 7 years ago at this point. So I'm trying to do mental math, 2015. And I know we're going to talk about it a lot today. It completely changed my view of money, my view of business, just how the world worked. So I'm really excited for this episode to dig in. And I'm a huge Tim Ferriss fan, always listening to his podcast. And thanks for having us, Doug.
Cool. And for me, I was a little late for the 4-hour work week. I heard about it probably in 2010, but never picked it up until I started getting into side hustles and the passive income side of things in 2013. And then I still didn't read the book until maybe halfway through 2014. And a lot of the wheels were in motion already for me, but it was a big impact. And I listened to the audio book, which I think is a little bit different experience than going through the print book. And then later I bought the print book. So I'm just curious, did either of you guys listen to the audiobook?
I did both.
Okay.
I hilariously kind of listened to an audiobook. So like I said, we read this, Lauren and I read this on a road trip. And so only one person can read at a time. So whoever was driving, the other person read the book out loud, because we found it randomly for $1 in a library that we visited in Alaska. So yeah, I kind of got the audiobook experience, but no, I did not listen to the audiobook.
That's pretty funny. And one thing I noticed from the audiobook was the narrator, like the voice. I could imagine it would like turn certain people off, just the cadence that he read and the way he approached the book. I mean, I still listen to the whole thing probably a couple times, but I was like, he kind of sounds like a dick sometimes. I'm not sure. I mean, no offense to that narrator or whatever, but Cody, did you get the same feeling, or were you, I don't know, is it just me?
No, I totally know what you're saying. I think the book does have more of a bang because there's diagrams. There's just a lot more illustrative examples in there. But I re-listened to the audiobook after reading the real book, I think twice. I think I read it once in 2015, maybe 2017. I listened to the audiobook in like 2019 or 2020. But I totally get what you're saying. The guy just kind of comes off as a dick.
Yeah. And it's, again, the points are well made and all that stuff. But if you catch it in the wrong mood, you're like, why are you so upset at me, guy? But okay. So before we get into some of the bullet points that we were talking about before, Stephen, you read it sort of fresh, and you wrote a blog post, which we'll link up to so people can check it out. But I didn't prep you for this, Stephen, but if you feel comfortable, can you lay out the dis and some of the ideas of the book sort of in a broad stroke? And if this is not a good thing to go to, then we can move on to the next question here.
No, it's fine. So the book is laid out in this format that's called DEAL. And I probably will misremember what each of those letters stands for in the acronym, but basically the idea is that you need to think about your goals and your fears and what you want first. Then you need to, so that's the D. I don't actually remember what the D stands for, but it's basically like goal setting. And then E is elimination, which was really interesting, and kind of has like some interesting parallels to like minimalism, really, where you just cut out everything that's wasting your time and wasting your life in an effort to become more efficient. A is automate. And so there's things about like how to make your job or your side hustle or your business make money without you putting in extra time and making it like more like scalable and more automated. Talks about like outsourcing. It talks about computer programs that can help you, all kinds of stuff like that. And then L, I think, is liberate. And so that's kind of the end where you're like becoming free because you've set up this lifestyle that has like way less bullshit in it and way more automation in it and sort of like automatic or semi-passive income. And then you're sort of done with the program there.
Perfect. And thanks for that, Stephen. And I even said DIS, which is from the 4-Hour Chef for learning, not deal. So thank you for fixing that up. And yeah, we'll link up because your blog post outlines that stuff. And Cody, do you have anything to add there before we get into it here?
No, I think Stephen definitely has the book more top of mind. I couldn't have rallied off the DEAL there.
I couldn't either.
Yeah.
So Steven, yeah, that's awesome.
Oh, and if I don't mention this, she'll probably get mad at me. Lauren wrote the blog post, not me. So just for the record.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, Lauren. You get credit. Okay. So let's start really broad, and maybe each of us could pick one or two things that we really liked about the book and maybe if we used it. So Cody, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I mean, the most striking thing to me, and I talked about how this like completely transformed my view of money and the world, was the idea, and Stephen, you touched on this, the idea that you could basically build something, whether it's like a business or maybe it's rental real estate or maybe it's like even index funds, talking about like the FIRE movement. You could build something or pour money or something, just pour your resources into a thing, and then that thing is going to pay you in perpetuity with like little to no effort on the back end. And like that idea of making money without having to work for it, you put in the initial work, but then you get paid on that thing in perpetuity. That was completely foreign to me. All the people in my life who were like quote unquote rich, I have like a cousin who's a lawyer, some people who are doctors, like they're working for their money every single hour. They're getting paid based on the amount of hours they worked. So this idea that Tim Ferriss threw out, like, he called it muses. Now it's more commonly known as side hustles. And he talked about business building. Like that whole concept was just so foreign to me. So that's something that I really took to heart. And I just like started to try to build businesses. I had a couple failed businesses. Since then, I've had a couple successful businesses, but I can credit the 4-Hour Work Week for like just getting that idea in my head and planting that seed.
And you went pretty deep too, because you actually did like a physical product business. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that sounds so much more involved than, I got into websites, right? So I started writing, and that's a lot easier when you're dealing with physical products. You have supply chain, your inventory is tying up capital. There's a lot of other things to consider. So yeah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was this story where I started this physical products business and it made me like a multimillionaire. That's not the story. I did do okay with it and made some money. It was a disc golf manufacturing company. And the idea was like I put in all this legwork up front. I did hundreds of hours of research, finding the plastics distributor, finding the molding company, like getting all the disc molds perfect. And then it was like, basically all I have to do is hire a salesperson, and then this company is going to run itself. Once we have the discs, we have distribution channels. Now we just need like a salesperson, and boom, I'm like in the CEO chair and I'm going to be making money. That was the plan anyway. I did all right, but like I wouldn't have even had the idea for a concept like that if it wasn't from Tim Ferriss. I mean, at the time I was like a waiter and I was working in like clothing stores and I was just trading my time for money. I never even thought that I could like build something that would then pay me in the future, even when I wasn't working on it, which is exactly what happened.
Awesome. And anything else? I know in past conversations you have mentioned like outsourcing. So I know that was a big chunk of the book. So Cody, anything on outsourcing?
That didn't come till later for me. I was really scrappy. I was 19. Like I said, I had no money to outsource, quite honestly, when I built that disc golf company. Like I was doing everything from the skin of my teeth. I really didn't have any money to pay for outsourcing. But as I've started to progress in my business career and tried new ventures, like I have slowly, with every single business I start now, like I create what's called SOPs, standard operating procedures. I'll write out exactly the things I'm doing, whether it's like recording a podcast or creating a digital product. I will document that in like a Google Doc, or I'll record a video using a software like Loom. And then I will hire someone and basically show them exactly what I'm doing. I'll hire them. And now I just bought all of my time back for that exact task. And so I've done this in basically all of my businesses to date: real estate, podcasting, digital products. And now I have like a whole fleet of contractors who are kind of doing all these random little tasks for me that even if it takes me half an hour, like I just bought that half an hour back with $10, $15, $20, you name the price. But that has been really, really powerful. And it's allowed me to kind of be able to sit in the CEO seat rather than working in my business all the time, just grinding.
What about you, Steven? A couple things that you liked from the book that either you started using or you used in the past and it happens to be in the book?
Yeah, the book was really interesting for me because like I said, I read it from a perspective of like entering into early retirement. And so it's kind of like backwards from, I guess, the way most people discover it. But, like the outsourcing thing, for example, paying other people to do stuff for you to save your time because your time could be better spent somewhere else making more money or whatever. I mean, that was like a completely foreign concept to me. I feel like I got to early retirement with a very like DIY attitude and like a never pay extra for anything that you can do yourself, right? And so it kind of opened my eyes to like, well, that's not necessarily always true and always correct, because Tim Ferriss, I think, makes some good arguments for that in the book. At the same time, I think there's like a slippery slope element to it, right? Where you can pay like too much for convenience too. So I would caution people against that. But I definitely think that there were some great ideas in there with that. Things that resonated with me in the book that like definitely helped on the early retirement journey that Tim Ferriss espouses is like, I remember, I think it was in the first section, in the D section, where he kind of warns against at some point, like, hey, eventually you're going to produce this passive income with these businesses that you set up, and you're going to become this business person running a business. Realize that by setting these goals for yourself, the things that you want, envision the stuff you want, that once you meet those goals and you're set and you've got this passive income rolling in and you can pay for all these dreams that you had, you don't necessarily need more after that. And you have to realize, like, don't become the person that works a 40 or 80-hour work week when you only need to work a 4-hour work week just because you can make more and more and more money after that. That's not the point, right? And so he actually talks about like purposely giving up opportunities for more income past a certain point. And I thought that was great advice, and was actually like pretty surprising to read in what is basically a business book, right? So that's one that like I definitely took to heart, because I had already used that in my own journey, right? To retire, you have to set a number and say like, yeah, I'm happy with this and I'm good with that. And then other stuff that was really, really useful, probably the stuff I've most immediately applied since reading the book, is not so much related to business, but related to like lifestyle design. So he talks about cutting things out of your life that are a waste of your time, waste of your money, waste of your energy. He talks about the low information diet, right? Consuming less news that's designed to just like glue you to a screen and get you emotionally riled up for no real reason. Wasting less time just like scrolling social media endlessly with no real purpose. And even just like batching tasks that you have to do, or that maybe you even want to do, like communicating with other people via email, right? Take all your emails for the day or for the last 2 or 3 days or the last week or whatever it is, and just sit down and answer them all at once, instead of sitting glued to your computer screen inside all day, not doing anything fun, and answering emails and calling it productive, right? It's not productive to just sit there glued to your screen refreshing your inbox. And he puts that in the context of like, hey, if you batch together all your emails during like 1 hour for like a 3-day period, you can use all that extra time to be productive, right? Well, I think about it as I can use all that extra time to like go outside and jump in my kayak or something, right? Instead of like sitting inside and just like thinking that I'm busy when I'm not really busy. So removing this idea of like busyness from your life, it's surprising how many hours a day you waste, and that I'm still guilty of wasting time. So I've tried to really take that to heart from the book, is just to waste less time.
Perfect. Yeah. And that's actually a good reminder for me, because I know that I should batch my emails, and I don't necessarily sit and refresh all day, but sometimes I have to hop in to do a little work and I need to see an email, and then I see something and I'm like, oh, I'll just check that one out. But I need to like, you can pause your inbox so it doesn't refresh. I need to do that. So thanks for the reminder, Stephen. I'm so terrible with that. I just keep seeing them come in. You send one, you get 2 back. It's a nightmare. So perfect. Okay. So I liked a lot of the stuff that you guys mentioned, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. A couple things that were big. Number one is the dream line. So this exercise is where you write out your dreams and then you put it on a timeline, which I don't think he says he's combining those two things in the book specifically, but eventually I put that together. And my wife and I did that exercise in 2014, midway through. So I listened to the book, and finally, through enough encouragement, my wife did the exercise too. And it was, kind of difficult. It doesn't take that long, but you have to like write down your dreams, and you're like, do I want to write it on paper? it's not really for anyone else, but you're still like, this is kind of embarrassing, especially where I was at in my professional career. And crazy thing is, pretty much all the things that mattered to me, like I ended up doing it within 5 years. I never looked back at that document, but we ended up moving out west, buying a house with like a mountain view. One of the things, funny enough, I live in Colorado now, but our initial move was to Montana, which I would argue it's somewhat better than Colorado in some ways, but now we're in Colorado. Technically, if you stand on the edge of the yard, you can see a couple mountains, but it's not really a mountain view kind of place. Then a few of the other things I wrote down were, kind of meaningless, whatever I was into, like those couple weeks or whatever, but largely everything I was able to accomplish it. And, kind of to your point, Stephen, at some point when you reach your goals, you have to figure out like what to do. So I will talk a little bit more about that later. The other piece going to riff off of what you said, Cody, is around like time freedom. So it's the other side of the coin of the passive income where your dollars are not tied to hour by hour. And that was huge because I realized, I don't necessarily want to be like more productive continually. Maybe I want to go outside and just walk around for a little while. So I'm definitely leaning more in that direction. And I think a lot of I don't want to say a lot. Some of my friends are still in the area where they're like, I just want to earn more money. And I have a friend, I was just talking to him the other day, and he's doing really well with his primary business, but he's like, I want to grow it more and I want to do more on, some social platform so I could earn even more. And I was like, why? Like you could just do like the one thing you're already doing like really well there. And he was like, I want fuck you money. I want like really fuck you money. And I'm like, who are you going to tell fuck you? Like you don't even have anyone to say that to at this point. Like you already won, but he's still like hungry for more. And just curious if you guys have seen people in your circles or, mastermind groups or something like that. And Stephen, I'll start with you, where they're like just so hungry and they want more and more and more.
I kind of think, without pointing to a specific person as an example, I think that's almost like the American culture default, right? Is like, that's not something we talk about very much, is like, oh, at what level will you have reached your goals and start to free up your time and work less? Like the default is work 40 plus hours a week until you are a designated age where it's okay to cut back on work, which is like sometime around 60 to 80 or something like that.
Right.
And so, I'd say that kind of applies to everyone. And most people don't give much thought to what they consider to be enough or when they're going to slow down and try to enjoy some time away from work.
How about you, Cody?
Yeah, I actually kind of want to defend the unnamed friend here for a second, because I kind of fall into that camp sometimes. And I think the 4-hour work week gets a lot of flack sometimes because it is clickbaity. It's the 4-hour work week. But I think the point of the 4-hour work week is you can do whatever the hell you want with whatever extra hours you have in the day. So like sometimes I'll be really into projects, like, and it is work, quote unquote, but I'm having a blast doing it. And I just like can't get away from my computer. And some weeks I'll work 60 hours because I'm so into the stuff that I'm working on. Other times, like I just got back from a 6-week trip to Hawaii. I did have some 4-hour work weeks. I think that's kind of the beauty of like financial independence and the 4-hour work week is like, if you're a workaholic and you love the art of business building and you just like really get fired up about like launching this new thing or doing whatever, like I do sometimes, I think it's totally fine. I think what's not okay is if you just want to hit like some monetary milestone for God knows what reason. You just want to like get $10 million because you want the fuck you money. But right. I think there is some merit in like, you can do whatever the hell you want once you get to that point. The point of the 4-hour work week is like, however many, what is it, 168 hours? The 164 hours in the rest of the 164 hours in the week are to do with what you choose.
Perfect. And Cody, that's great. It's much more interesting if we just don't all agree with each other for every point. And you are right. I think some of the people that I know, there's a couple of my friends, and I think they do enjoy it. They do enjoy it just like you do. And you're younger than us too. So you're 26, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a little more energy than us. I'm getting old now, and I don't have that kind of energy. But some of my friends, I think they might be staying busy so they don't have to deal with some other stuff in their lives. And that's just me projecting and judging people from my ivory tower up here. I know, what kind of question did I just ask? Do you have people in your life that are so successful that they're just trying to, we are all aware of the, like the luxurious positions that we're in, but it is interesting because some of my friends, I'm like, hey, you could like throttle down and like spend a little more time doing other things that it seems like they would want to do based on what they told me before. But if you love working or certain pieces in the way you're doing it, Cody, where you're like, I'm going to like grind hard, you have all this energy. And then when you relax, like you really relax and take the time off. So
Doug, I like your excuse. It must be for me too that I'm the old guy, right? I'm 32, so Cody over here at 26, he's got all that energy. Yeah, no, I actually, in response to Cody, I would say it's a good point. If you're starting a business or running a business or making a bunch of money and you're enjoying it and you're excited about it, because I have definitely had some of those times in my life where like figuring something out of like how to make business happen, how to make some more money has been like the number one most exciting thing that I was working on at that moment. If that's you at any given time, you should put all of your effort into that, because how often do you come across something that gets you that excited and makes you want to do something? I absolutely predict that at some point in my life, I'm going to start a business of some kind and get really excited about it. I just also want to have the perspective that, money wise, when it just comes to the money part, once you have enough money, then really you need to keep the perspective that everything you do from that point forward needs to be for some reason other than just to make money, right? And so that's like the key takeaway, I think.
Awesome.
Agreed.
And perfect. And I think that's a good point to get you to keep riffing, Steven. So earlier you talked about the approach of the 4-hour work week compared to FIRE. So financial independence, retire early, and traditional retirement. So do you want to kind of weave that into our conversation here?
Yeah. So I couldn't help but, given that I just read this book this year, I couldn't help but compare it to like the way that I did things versus like what I might have done if I read the 4-hour work week earlier, right? So I'll start off by saying maybe what I did wrong in my own path, and then I'll say what I think Tim Ferriss kind of gets wrong in the book compared to what I tried. So as I read the book, I thought to myself, wow, I spent my career pretty much working regular jobs for salaries with like small side hustles that didn't amount to large amounts of money. Like most of my income and Lauren's income was from just literally going to a W-2 type of job, and then saving the majority of that and investing it into passive investments like index funds, and then accumulating enough to retire or whatever. So that is like, after reading the book, I think that's in some ways the hardest possible way to achieve passive income for a lifetime, right? After reading the book, I was like, wait, I should have just been doing the things that my employers were doing and starting the scalable businesses that my employers had started, doing that myself early on. And if I had, I probably would have built it to a point where I could have turned it into like a 4-hour work week style, high income side business that I could run into retirement. And so for me, one of the big lessons from the book was building scalable businesses and building businesses that don't require significant time input to produce income. And so in that sense, I think that Tim Ferriss's plan can get you to a stage of what you might call like retirement or financial independence way, way faster than saving large portions of your income and investing it into index funds can. With that said, because that is a little bit of maybe a regret of mine that I didn't try something like that. I wish I had read the book earlier. With that said, I think that Tim Ferriss misses out on part of what the FIRE movement has to offer, which is when you focus on saving large amounts of money and banking large amounts of money into investment accounts and stuff, you feel an invincibility, and you have an invincibility that I don't think you can get quite the same from just depending on the income from a business to sustain your lifestyle. So if you have one of these muse businesses that's talked about in the book, there's always the very real possibility that the income from that business can drop by half or to zero practically overnight. And even if you have more than one of them, I mean, it reduces your risk, but a lot of times you're kind of in the same sector with them. And with investing in things like index funds, stock and bond market index funds, just having a nice big chunk of cash in a savings account, these are the things that you sleep really well about at night and you don't have to worry so much about. So if I was like trying to retire based on one of these muse businesses, I would be really worried if I didn't have a large like 6 or 7 figure sum in investment accounts or in the bank as well to fall back on. So I think that the book probably should have had more focus on genuine saving and have like providing yourself a safety net.
Quick follow-up, Stephen. How long did it take you and Lauren to retire?
Basically, like I would say 7 to 10 years of career, like depending on how you count exactly. We kind of like tapered off toward the end.
Okay, cool. Which is still obviously very fast. You were like 30, right? Or just under 30?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And Cody, do you have any ideas or comments based on what Stephen mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it goes back to just your risk tolerance and how comfortable you feel just depending on cash flow versus financial independence. Because you made a great point, Stephen. Like you can get, I call it cash flow financial independence a lot quicker than you can via the nest egg method. Like I have friends James and Emily, who retired in 2 years investing in rental real estate and have since been retired for the past 3 or 4 years. Like, so it worked for them. But that maybe their market crashes and maybe their rents go to half. Like that was a very real possibility that could happen. It didn't happen to them, but I think it all goes back to risk tolerance. There's so many ways to milk the cow, pardon that analogy, but there's so many ways to hit financial independence and retire early. I think you can always do a hybrid method. That's kind of what I did. I was like buying real estate, building businesses while I was saving a ton of money in index funds. But I think you're right. I don't remember specifically in the 4-Hour Work Week because I haven't like physically read it since like 2017, audiobook 2019. But yeah, he definitely didn't have a focus on like, you need to save. I don't think he even named a percentage of your income and like invest it, whether it was explicitly in index funds or somewhere else. I don't think he talks about saving at all. So that would definitely be a nice little, maybe a page or two in the 4-Hour Work Week if he were to make a revision and add a little FIRE movement flair to it.
Yeah. And a quick note, Stephen would not touch a cow. He's vegan, so he would leave that cow alone.
You could pet the cow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Like a sanctuary or something. So I
milk the almond.
And actually we do mostly, we just drink almond milk here. So
do
anyway, back on topic.
I'm doing the trendy thing. I got the oat milk in my coffee right now. So.
All right. I haven't gone to the dark side yet.
Not that dark, just almond.
Okay. Largely we were aiming towards FIRE versus traditional retirement. And that's kind of the path that I was looking at. I made a mistake early in my career via an introduction, like many of these insurance salesmen that pose as investment advisors or financial advisors. I bought like a whole life policy. Luckily, I was investing in a 401k and a Roth, and I was kind of like just thinking, hey, I'm going to have to work for a really long time here and hopefully like climb the corporate ladder. And eventually, when I started listening to like Smart Passive Income with Pat Flynn and started these side hustles, I was like, there's another way. And I can't remember when Tim Ferriss's podcast came out, but at that point, I started to realize, hey, there's a completely different path, and there's no way that I'm going to, keep working until whatever 62 or 60 or whatever. And in fact, at that point, my wife and I, we stopped investing in our retirement accounts because we actually funded those really well in our early years working, maxing out many of those accounts. So we started just post-tax brokerage and started to load that sort of leg of our investments, which we've kind of balanced it back out. And now that I have my own business, I am contributing more to some traditional retirement account, solo 401k. But once I, thought about starting my own business and then investing, and honestly didn't pay too much attention to the FIRE movement. I just kind of looked to see like where we should invest once we fired our advisors. And then we came across index funds and Mr. Money Mustache and just kind of filed that away. And then some years later, I got involved in the community, just moving close by to some of the folks that do blog. And now I can't imagine, number one, working for a company going down a traditional retirement account. I would largely be unemployable at this point. Yeah, I can't imagine like even having to go to an office or anything. And then on top of that, I couldn't imagine like working a job that I didn't like. So Cody, to your point earlier, you're like, I'm doing work, but I actually enjoy it. And the work that I'm doing, I enjoy. I just do, 15 hours a week or so. And that's about it. That's enough to keep me occupied and productive and creative and feel like I'm producing something. And it feels pretty good. So, all right.
Yeah, that's the name of the game.
So from here, let's talk about, a couple of these broad ideas did hold up pretty well. So actually, I'll leave it open and, what held up well? What are some things that maybe changed? And the book was published in 2007, I think. So the fact that so much of it has held up and actually worked for you really well in 2015, Cody, when you first read it. So yeah, I'll kick it over to you. Anything that held up well, didn't hold up very well over the years?
I think all of the big ideas hold up pretty well. The stuff that obviously isn't holding up as well, like the specific websites he mentions, I don't even remember which websites he mentions to get like VAs and automation tools. They've just gotten 100 times better now. I know before we hit record here, we were just chatting, and it is so much easier now in 2022 when we're recording this to build a business than it was in 2007. Like you can build a beautiful website in like an hour, just like using a basically drag and drop template. Like you can hire people in an hour just using like a website. I know there's like onlinejobs.ph and VA Assist and all these other ones. There's just like literally an unlimited number of tools at your fingertips that Tim Ferriss didn't have when he wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. Like it was a lot harder. Like you had to really kind of scour and find these like sneaky hacks. And now there's just like an automation for everything. You can just like connect all of your businesses with Zapier. It's like a click of a button. So I think, again, all the concepts have held up. I honestly think they've been strengthened, if anything, by just the advances in technology we've had over the past decade and a half. And so I was able to take the concepts that Tim Ferriss was talking about and implement them probably even faster and better than he could have in 2007 when he had more limited availability.
Yeah, so true. And just thinking, you have some online courses and some very good sales funnels and email marketing, and just putting that kind of stuff together, like online courses in 2007 would have been like a custom build. It would have been a nightmare. The sales funnels would have been probably custom also. Like I don't even know if you would have the capability with the email marketing to do what you can do now without like a full scale custom solution that would have costed probably like 6 figures or more. It's insane.
Oh yeah. I mean, you'd be sending emails with like Outlook, and then you'd be like dropping people a zip file full of videos. That's an online course. Maybe not 2007, but maybe like 2000, early 2000s when he started writing the book, because he said it took him a couple of years to finish it. So it's just like the advancements in technology have made things so much easier if you want to be a business owner today.
Yeah. Stephen, what do you think? Anything that held up really well or didn't hold up?
So I think the thing that probably held up maybe the best out of the book, I agree with the idea that the big concepts of the book have held up very well over time. And maybe the stuff toward the end of the chapters, like the specific recommendations, obviously some of those are going to be out of date. But the thing that maybe has like even strengthened the most out of anything is Tim Ferriss talks about if you do have like a traditional office job or an employer, ways to sort of convince your boss that it's okay for you to do some or all of your work from home or remotely or eventually like where you're traveling wherever you want and doing your job from somewhere else. That's kind of his alternative path to if you don't start like a business, moving your job to remote. that today is easier than it's ever been, right? So I saw some statistic the other day that it was like a few years ago, it was like 3% of job listings on LinkedIn were remote, and today it's like 17% or something like that. Like these remote jobs are just much more available, and employers have kind of been forced to test out remote work through COVID. So people who are really reluctant to try it, at least for some of those businesses, it's worked out really well and they've stuck with it. I know of like several businesses in my own life that are like shutting down their office buildings that they used to maintain, that they maintained for decades. And they're just like, oh yeah, we don't even need this anymore. We can save, $10,000, $20,000 a month on rent or whatever, just shutting down this building. So that's more relevant than ever. Some of the software recommendations in the book are like way out of date. I think I may be the only person who read the book in 2022 and still related to, hey, here's why you need to waste less time on your BlackBerry. Because at the beginning of this year, I was still using BlackBerry. So
I didn't even know they still made those. Yeah.
I didn't either.
That's crazy. So yeah, I can echo a lot of what you guys mentioned. The tools, you can't blame someone to, mention tools. He probably knew that those were going to change. And obviously a lot of it was technology based or website based. And some of them, I think Elance is like the company that he mentioned, and then it turned into Odesk and now Upwork. So you can still follow like the lineage for some of the tools and stuff that you mentioned, but yeah, you can't blame them. I mean, that's what was around at the time. A couple in the broad scope of the principles and ideas, those obviously held up pretty well. I think, one area that I'll highlight is the corner office test. And like I said, I was in a corporate job, so I was in the safe area of middle management where I could like skate by, which it actually wasn't that bad. I just didn't like the job that much. But there was obviously a drive to, get promoted and move up and do more work and, move up the corporate ladder. So one of the exercises or stories in the book was a corner office test, and just, look at the people that are 5 or 10 or 15 years ahead of you and think, do I want that life? If I'm successful and I actually get that promotion, if I get that corner office, do I want to be doing that? Do they look like they're having a good time? And for me, it was very clear, no. It looked like they were more miserable than me. They may have gotten paid more. I don't even think it was that much more, but they worked a lot harder. They did have a better title. They were directors or senior directors or something, but that just meant they had to put up with more bullshit. And I was like, well, this doesn't seem like a good route for me. So when I did discover that I could do things differently, that I maybe could run my own business, it was a no-brainer. And then a couple years later, after I was getting, these poisonous ideas for a corporate ladder climber, I was like, oh, I'm going to push the envelope more and more. So we started slow traveling, and I was already working remotely, but I didn't tell my company that I was slow traveling. I was just like testing it a month here or there. And then we did a 3-month trip where we planned on moving. So that's how we ended up in Montana. And I just moved once we signed the lease. Then I called my boss and I was like, hey, we moved and hopefully we could work something out. I could work remotely out here. Let me know what you want to do. And then they kept me for a couple more weeks, but then they laid me off, which was great because then it let me like spread my wings and, do whatever I wanted. But it was all these ideas and the podcast and the corner office test. And then I was like, why would I want to do this? This seems like a really bad environment for me specifically. It can work great for other people and whatever, that's fine, but just not for me. So very good.
Doug, the parts of I loved your story that you just told, because there were so many parts of it where you had a job, like obviously like a good job, and you kind of just did the things that you wanted to try, regardless of whether your employer gave you permission to do those things. And then if your employer decided that they were cool with that, then fine, then that's great. We can continue the arrangement. And if they say that it's not cool and they're not okay with it, that's fine too. We part ways, and you've got your setup because presumably you had savings or some other plan for how to make income or whatever, and that is so powerful. Like I think a lot of people hear the ideas of like trying to push for remote work or trying to push for a sabbatical or time to travel or any of that stuff, and they say, "Oh, my boss will never let me do that," and then they let that be the end of that dream immediately. And if you have savings in the bank, or if you have some kind of business that's producing income in the background, one of those two things, or both even, you get to just tell your boss, like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And, let me know. If you want to keep me around, that's cool. If not, no big deal. And it's life changing. That's kind of exactly what Lauren and I have done like multiple times throughout our careers.
Awesome. Cody, did you ever do something like that?
Yeah, I was going to say the corner office test was a big one for me. And I don't know if I got it from the 4-hour work week because I wasn't in that job until like 3 years later. But I think it was the FIRE movement actually that just kind of made me assess my situation. But I mean, it's real. It's like if you don't have a plan to move companies or try entrepreneurship or whatever, and you take a look at your manager, the person right above you, and they're miserable, like that's where you're going to be if you keep doing well in that job. So like take a real honest look at that. And I remember looking at my boss, who was like probably 15 years older than me. He was making actually way more money than me. I was making like 75K. He was making like 200K in my short-lived corporate job that I was in for 7 months. But he'd complain about his like wife every day. He had like 3 vacation homes. His kids didn't like him. It was like, this guy was miserable. And I'm like, this is where I'm headed if I stay in this job. And that was my plan initially. Like I was going to work in that job for 7 years. I had my spreadsheet. I was like, I'm going to hit FIRE. I'm going to be making this money over the next X number of years, save this percentage, do the whole nest egg thing. And I said, screw this. Like I'm going to be miserable for 7 years. I know I can do it in 7 years. It's like, we're kind of sitting on our high horses here, like 7 years. And I know we were talking about like, I wish I did this earlier, Steven. You're like, I wish I tried this, but you retired at 30, dude. Like it's nice to look back and be like, I wish I did that. But yeah, I was just like, I don't want to be miserable. And so that's kind of what pushed me off the edge and maybe try out entrepreneurship full time, was doing that corner office test and seeing my miserable dick of a boss complain about his family every day.
Yeah, and to give people hope, I didn't discover any of this stuff till I was like 35. So like there's hope if you reach
Give them
your
hope.
30s. Yeah. You can still pull it off. I did a couple things in the right way early on, but largely I didn't pick up any of this stuff. Oh, and side note, how did you guys each find like the FIRE movement and stuff? So Steven, why don't you tell us? Because I mean, the fact that you guys were able to retire so early, you had a good influence early on. So Steven, how did you guys get into it?
Yeah, definitely. And just to add on to what you were saying earlier, yes, you can do this stuff in a period of 7 or 10 years or whatever. So even if you're 40 or 45 or 50 and you're starting with 0, it's pretty encouraging to think like, oh, I'm actually maybe not as far behind as I thought. If I get started on this, I can do it in that short period of time. Just add 7 or 10 to your current age, and that's when you can be retired. So yeah, I would not discourage anyone who's older. But to answer your question, when did Lauren and I discover FIRE? Basically, I think we had like the most fortunate possible case. We graduated from college and we started making like real incomes, which were not particularly high incomes, but they were real full-time incomes. And we were used to spending money like college students, right? And so if you're used to the scraping pennies college lifestyle and you continue it while you make a full-time income, you accidentally have a whole bunch of extra money just kind of piling up in your checking account. And so our first question we just kind of asked generically was like, okay, what are you supposed to do with money, right? And so we started researching investing. And so we kind of came up with this idea of like, oh, we should invest money. And then, if we keep having excess money, we keep investing it, maybe one day that means we could live off the interest, right? And it was like this weird idea. And then Lauren was sitting at work one day and kind of wasting time, right? The stuff that Tim Ferriss talks about in his book, and just browsing the internet, right? And she ran across a news article about Mr. Money Mustache. She immediately sent it to me, emailed it to me. I read it, and then I kind of binged that entire blog. And that blog made concrete this idea that we had like loosely formed about like, oh, if we have extra money, we invest it. Eventually, we can live off the investments. And yeah, so Mr. Money Mustache kind of made that solid for us.
What about you, Cody?
Got to give a shout out to the same dude. My mom actually sent me a Mr. Money Mustache article in, I want to say 2016 or 2017, maybe late 2016, early 2017. It was a shockingly simple math article because she knew I was into this side hustle stuff. I was building businesses because Tim Ferriss taught me to. And then she's like, check this out. Like, you can retire, in 5 years if you save 75 or 80% of your income. I was like, oh my God, like, I'm already super frugal. I'm just going to try to make as much money as I possibly could. And that just kind of forced me down the rabbit hole. And that's how I discovered, tons of different podcasts and other influencers, other bloggers at the time, now YouTubers and TikTok and Instagram, and just all these people who had retired like in their 20s, 30s, 40s, just way faster than I knew was humanly possible.
Cool. And for me, it was kind of sideways. So I mentioned before, I think we found Mr. Money Mustache just trying to figure out where to invest. And to tie it full circle, I think I heard Pete's interview on the Tim Ferriss show in 2017, I think. And that like rekindled the ideas. And by then I was doing pretty well with my business. I had been doing it for a couple years after getting laid off. And I was like, oh, this seems like pretty possible. And we had been tracking our net worth since 2014 or so. So there were a couple good years in there. I think 2017 or 18 was a little flat, but as you're watching it go up, once you hit a certain point, the compound interest really kicks in the momentum. You can't stop it. It's a bad year this year, but we have those occasionally. But at that point I was like, oh, this is like really pretty possible. And then just through luck and good timing, we ended up moving to Longmont, where Pete lives, and a couple other people around here, and then got sort of introduced into the community and became friends with people and all that stuff, and then started going to like Camp Fives or FinCon or whatever, where you could really like hang out for a long time and like build those friendships and all that. So one thing I want to talk about, especially tying in the FIRE movement and the conversations that I've had with people that have reached retirement at early ages, there's a period where some people hit like a depression. They don't know what to do, basically. They were working really hard. They were accumulating. Maybe they were pretty type A. They stayed busy at their job, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden, they have a huge void to fill. And I know, listening to some of Ferriss's podcast, he has mentioned like, the most important is the liberate section of the book, where it's like, now what? Okay, you reached your goals. Now what are you going to do with your time? And through a lot of conversations, it sounds like people need to have it figured out before they get there. Otherwise, they're kind of they're going to freak out depending on their personality type. So not a specific question, but Cody, any observations in that area?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And that's the reason why I'm glad I didn't go the nose to the grindstone for 7 years of that miserable corporate job way, is I think a lot of people make the mistake you're talking about, Doug, is they'll put their head down and they'll work for 7, 10, 15 years. They'll hit that nest egg number and then they'll quit and they'll be like, well, what the hell do I do now? I don't have any hobbies. I haven't really been like building this ideal lifestyle. And it's always once this, then that. It's like, once I hit financial independence, then I'll start working out. Then I'll learn how to play the guitar. Then I'll spend more time with my kids. But it's like, that's not how it happens. Like, if you're not working out while you're going toward financial independence or learning the guitar or spending time with your kids, you're probably not going to do it after, even though you get all that time back. And then you're going to have to be faced with the really real problem of, the reason I'm not doing this isn't because I was working in that job. It's because of something else. It's because I have this like insecurity, or I just don't have enough motivation to start, or whatever. So you're going to have to, unfortunately, take money out of that equation and realize the real reasons you're not doing the stuff you say you want to do. So I think people should really try to start to build their ideal lifestyle while they're going toward financial independence. Maybe that means once you start to get like a little bit of a emergency fund built up, you have like your investments compounding, or you're building a business, whatever way you want to go. Maybe you scale back work 5 hours a week and you do spend time working out or playing the guitar or hanging out with your kids, or whatever that activity is for you that you say you want to do, that you've been saying that for 5 years and you still haven't done it. And you listeners know exactly what I'm talking about. There's always something you're like, this is the year I'm going to learn Spanish. And then 10 years later, you still haven't learned Spanish. It's like, you got to kind of figure out how you can incorporate that into your daily routine and start to build those things in intentionally so that when you do pull the trigger and you do really scale back on work, now you have all these awesome things that you've been practicing and that you're good at, and you have these hobbies, you have these side hustles or passion business or like whatever that is to you. You gotta build the dream life for you while you're chasing the goal, so that dream life is there waiting for you when you hit the goal.
And before we move to Steven, Cody, what are your hobbies? Like what are those things for you?
So I was naming some stuff of mine, but it was like spending more time with my fiance, was my girlfriend at the time. I was chasing fiance Lauren, and yeah, Steven and I have the same fiance / wife's names, not to confuse people here. And so that was one of them. Another one was just like being more intentional about like getting outside and doing something. I know Steven mentioned he likes going out and kayaking. Like I have a lake house in the summer. We love just getting out, sitting on the kayaks in the lake, or even going for a swim, or even in the winter, just getting outside instead of just like being stuffed behind my computer all day. So I've been really intentional about that, like making sure I get those activity hours in. Learning Spanish was another one. So like over the past couple of years, I've been really ripping it up on Duolingo. We got a Spanish tutor. Like I just been slowly building that into my daily routine. Working out was another one. It was like I had trouble working out while I was in that corporate job because I had like basically 12, 14-hour days with the commute. And it was really hard, but I still like try to make it to the gym most days. I kept it as part of my routine. And as I started to scale back the number of hours I was working each week, that habit was just still there. So yeah, during the whole period, I was just like trying to make sure I was doing all the things that when I tell someone what I'm about, the things I like to do, like I want to make sure I'm actually doing that stuff. I want to make sure traveling is another big one. I just mentioned we just spent 6 weeks in Hawaii. I love, snowboarding, like all these things that if I say that I love doing it and I don't do it, then that means that I'm not setting enough time for that activity. So yeah, it depends on the season, depends on the season of my life and the season, because I'm in New England and it's friggin' freezing in the winter and warm in the summer. So the activities switch it up. But yeah, man, it's just figuring out what you like and really dedicating that time every day. So that's kind of how it looks like for me.
All right. Okay. How about you, Steven? So we'll swing back to the, observations on people that reach early retirement.
Yeah, so I would say if you're in the middle of your career or building a business or having a job or whatever, and you think that part of the reason why you're unhappy or what you're striving for is that you need more time off work, that if you didn't have this job, if you didn't have this obligation, you'd be happier. Instead of putting your nose to the grindstone and saving up so much money that you can retire, or gaining so much passive income that you can retire, and then finding out the answer at the end, I highly, highly recommend finding out that answer as soon as possible. So perfect example of this is when Lauren and I were 24, 25, this is back in 2015. Our net worth at that point was probably just a little over $150,000. So nowhere near enough money to retire off of, right? But some good money in the bank, good investments, feeling secure. At the time, our expenses were very low. That was probably 7 years of annual expenses for us combined. So you start to think to yourself, well, I'm nowhere near retirement, but I literally have 7 years of money sitting in the bank. So I could go without a job for practically as long as I want, right? So we took that time and we just decided, okay, well, we just got married. Let's take 6 months and let's just go to Hawaii and just see what it's like to like not have full-time jobs. And let's just see what this early retirement lifestyle that we're like kind of working toward is really like for a minute. And so that's one of the things that's talked about a little bit in the 4-Hour Workweek is this mini retirement idea. And that's pretty much what we did. So we went to Hawaii for 6 months. We put a list up on our refrigerator, a handwritten list that said, badass stuff we need to do ASAP. That's what it said at the top of the list. And we just listed off like all the cool stuff on the big island of Hawaii where you just were, Cody, that we wanted to see. And just other random projects that we wanted to do and try. Some of them we never ended up doing, didn't have the motivation for. Maybe that means that those weren't the most important things to us. We learned a little bit about ourselves. And fortunately, the answer to our question of what is early retirement like for us was, it's great. It was awesome. That 6 months was a lot of fun. And I think it motivated us even more. And when we got back from that, back to Florida, we were like ready to go and more motivated than ever to make more money and save more money and reach this early retirement. And I could see where for someone else, maybe it doesn't go the same way. Maybe you discover, hey, I don't have enough hobbies or interests, or I don't have enough close connections with other people. And maybe these are issues that I need to like address in my life. Or maybe the answer is my passion in life is running a business, and I couldn't wait to get back to that. And that's okay too, if that's the answer for you. I don't know what the answer is for you, but we felt that experience was so important to us that we have like a financial roadmap on our blog that takes you from zero to early retirement. And one of the steps on the roadmap is take a chunk of time off and find out if this is right for you. Because even though that's not financially best, obviously it's going to cost you some time and money, it is well worth it to do that exploration.
It's hard to add to what each of you said there, but as far as testing, I'll tell a story about some friends of ours. So they had, kind of a life-changing experience, some illness, and they were like, hey, you know what, we're gonna die someday, so let's do the stuff that we want to do. And they didn't test it; they like jumped in. So they actually like bought a house in like 20 acres in Red Lodge, Montana, which is on the way to Yellowstone and near the Beartooth Highway. It's very remote. I think it's only, maybe 1,000 or 1,500 people that live in town, and they were like 20 minutes away. The winters are extremely long, very cold, ton of snow, and they lived there for a couple of years, and it didn't work out for them. So they moved to a bigger city, but they could have tested it. They could have rented a house for, a month or two. They could have rented it for like a year and signed a lease to just make sure that the seasons were okay there. But they jumped in, and it ended up being, kind of a pain. They've worked it out, of course, at this point, but they had to move. They had to figure out how to sell their place. It happened to be a down market, and it was very difficult. I think they lost a lot of money and a lot of frustration just dealing with it. So if you can test it, figure it out. And I remember in the book, Tim says, if you want, a Ferrari, like rent one for a day, like just see if you actually enjoy it. Maybe that's all you need. You don't need to buy a Ferrari, just rent it for a day, like once a month, and have a good time. And like, that's way cheaper than like buying a Ferrari. Probably. I think they're expensive. So I bet it is. Okay, cool. Well, do you guys have any sort of final thoughts on the book or anything like that before we sign off here?
I just want to kind of riff off what you were just saying there, because I think it's easier than ever, and I'll relate this back to a real story, to rent things and test them out. So a few years ago, and this is when entrepreneurship was going well for me, and I mentioned I live in New England. It's freezing in the winters, and I'm jealous of people who live in places that are warm all year. So I was like, let's look at buying a place in Florida. And then as I started to think about it more, I'm like, okay, realistically, we're going to spend like 4 months there, maybe during the cold months. With Airbnb, VRBO, all these, it's so much cheaper and so much more cost efficient for me to just stay in an Airbnb in a place I want to be in, rather than having this house that's like sitting vacant that I have to worry about. I could rent it out and set up a whole system, but that's a whole nother podcast and discussion. I could like rent it out in Airbnb, whatever. But it's just like, you do have all these luxuries that are way cheaper than, when Tim Ferriss was writing The 4 Hour Work Week in 2006 and 2007, it's way cheap. You can go rent a Ferrari on Turo. You can go get the sickest mansion ever on Airbnb. And it's so much more affordable and accessible than it was back in 2007. I don't even think Airbnb and Turo both weren't things at that point. So I feel like luxury is at your fingertips, and it's a lot easier to experience luxury without having to foot the massive luxury bill. You can even fly in a private jet. There's that airline JSX. You can fly from like LAX to like, Las Vegas for $200 in a private jet. And that's a real thing now. Like go look it up if people aren't familiar. It's crazy. And 20 years ago, you'd have to buy all these things and own them yourself to be able to experience like that level of bouginess and luxury. So it's a lot easier now to kind of do the testing, do the mini retirement thing than it was 15 years ago when you wrote the book.
It's only $200. It's crazy.
Literally, LAX to Vegas, because someone flew in. I was at a conference in Vegas. Someone flew in and they took a Snapchat. They were getting off of this jet JSX. I'm like, how much do you pay for that ticket? $213. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, why isn't everybody doing this? Like, people don't know about it. They're just like offering luxury, and it's not like a 4-person private jet. I think they're like maybe 25, 30 people, but it's a jet. It's not just like a commercial airline. It's
Gotcha.
sick. Yeah.
It's like flying Frontier or something. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's way better.
Yeah, no, it's all good. All right. Steven, any thoughts here?
I would be curious to hear from people who try those experiences. I've never thought of the idea of like renting the luxuries that you're lusting after. I think for us, like, we kind of skipped over that because we never really were like lusting after fancy cars or private jets or whatever. But I kind of like the idea. I wonder how many people who rent a private jet or rent a Ferrari or rent a mansion might leave that experience and say, that was fun, but like, I don't think I need that every day for the rest of my life. And I certainly don't think it's worth $1 million of my effort to get it. So yeah, maybe that's the antidote for people who really, really lust after that stuff.
And just thinking of a car, I mean, I'm not a car person, but if you did have a nice car, I would just be nervous for scratches or like just anything like a pebble, like hitting it and scratching it up if you have, a really nice pristine car versus, if you're renting, obviously you don't want to mess up someone's rental or a Turo or whatever. But at the same time, like, you don't have to go home and like pay insurance and taxes and all the other bullshit. So there's like overhead, even if you're like, oh, I could buy a house or a condo in Florida, like there's all this admin stuff that you have to deal with too, which is kind of a pain in the ass. And you can buy the convenience and just test things out, and that makes a lot more sense. So very cool. All right. Well, I think this has been really fun. It's a great book. I think I have all of Tim Ferriss's books. I don't listen to the podcast quite as much, but definitely was a fanboy for a lot of years. So I think people should, still check it out if you haven't read it. I mean, it's worthwhile. Now it's like a historical piece in like the side hustle entrepreneurship area. So, all right, guys. Well, this has been a blast. I'll let each of you tell people where they could find you. So, Steven, why don't you kick it off? Where are you at?
Yeah, so our blog is tripofaLifestyle.com. Has a bunch of info on early retirement and investing and how to travel for cheap. Everything on our blog and on all of our channels, all of our content is free. So check it out.
Cool. And you have like social and YouTube, so I'll link up to all that stuff too. But the home base is the website.
Yeah, at Trip of a Lifestyle on any social media, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. The only weird one is Twitter. Twitter's TOA Lifestyle because they limit your character. I think we're one character too long for the Twitter handle.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll link it up so people can get to it. And then, Cody, what about you? Where are you at?
Well, if you like listening to people talk, you'll probably enjoy my podcast, The Financial Independent Show, where both of these awesome guys have been guests before. You can get that wherever you listen to podcasts. And then if you're interested in making passive income through digital products, that's at goldcityventures.com. We get a bunch of free stuff on there. We do have some paid stuff on there too if you want like really in-depth training. But yeah, those are probably the best ways. And then you can probably just link up on my socials, Doug.
Perfect.
Most active on Instagram, though.
Instagram. All right. Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure, gentlemen, and I'll talk to you soon.
Cool.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.